If it's the last thing I do, if it's true that I feel more for you than you do for me, it's stunning, honey, how love has some ways. 'Cause one of these days our love takes flight. We're gonna get it and get it right. One of these days.
Explorers, adventurers, scientists, the ones who always broadened our horizons. We were at their side when they reached the deepest point in the oceans, the highest summits of the Earth, and both poles. We may think we've seen it all, that the world has its limits after all. But why do explorers, adventurers, scientists continue to venture out there again and again? Certainly not just for the record. So what do they seek, really? To understand more intimately how complex and delicate our planet is, to document its change and how we can affect it for the better. As long as they need it, we will be at their side. Because today, the real discovery is not so much about finding new lands, it's about looking with new eyes at the marvels of our planet, rekindling our sense of wonder and acting here and now to preserve this pale blue dot and make it perpetual.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Conservation Night of World Oceans Week. Thank you so much for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Callie Wielenturf. I am a marine conservation biologist and National Geographic explorer. What we're going to be discussing tonight is the single most powerful concept that has given me hope for the future of society's relationship with nature. It's a concept that has been around for hundreds of years within indigenous culture, but is only more recently being integrated into nationwide societal frameworks. This is the Explorers Club, and we're in a new age of exploration. We're not just about climbing the tallest peaks and reaching the bottom of the ocean. We're about exploring new ways of doing things, questioning the status quo, and being open-minded about the endless possibilities that exploring this planet truly means. This panel is about exploring novel ways to protect the ocean by taking a rights-based approach. This emerging conservation strategy is different from traditional environmental law. Existing environmental conservation frameworks are clearly not working on the sizable scale that they need to protect biodiversity from continuing devastating declines. Most of our current environmental laws simply put a report, a timeline, or a price in the way of continued long-term destruction of the oceans and coastal habitats. This existing paradigm doesn't work. Our progress is too slow, and the basis on which we judge our progress is fundamentally anthropocentric. Did you know that corporations have legal personhood rights, but nature has none? How can we give rights to corporations, but not nature that sustains us? It's time for a new paradigm shift to give nature equal standing and recognize her inherent rights. It's time to recognize the rights of the ocean. The goal of this panel tonight is to explore the concept of the rights of nature and its application to ocean governance. We're hoping that tonight can be a crash course in the rights of nature perspectives, frameworks, and strategies, in addition to how taking a rights of nature approach can be utilized specifically to protect the ocean. We hope that you'll learn, 1, what the rights of nature are, 2, why they're important, 3, the different ways to advocate for nature's rights through science and storytelling and policy and indigenous cultural perspectives, and ultimately how the average member of the public can get involved with this movement. We have an impressive lineup of panelists here with us tonight, and I'm truly honored to share them with you. Some may be familiar faces, and others had never stepped through the doors of the club until tonight. We will share more details later on, but everyone on the panel here tonight was involved in a recent major win for nature. We proposed, drafted, and debated a new law proposal to recognize the intrinsic rights of nature in Panama. The rights of nature to exist, persist, regenerate her vital cycles, to representation in court, to representation in legal courts, among others. And we're excited to share, for those of you that haven't heard yet, the President of Panama signed our proposal into law on February 24th, just 3 months ago. We're extremely excited about the implications that this law will have for protecting the ocean in Panama. And towards the end of the panel, we have another exciting announcement for you, so please stay tuned. Now, to introduce our honored guests. First, I would like to present someone that I met during a legal debate in Panama, Indigenous climate warrior Dewey Valiente, who is dedicated to fighting climate change and lifting up the voices and plights of coastal communities. Dewey is the Planning and Tourism Development Director with the Ministry of Tourism of Panama at such a young age, and has a unique perspective on harmonizing indigenous knowledge within governmental frameworks. He flew from Panama to be here with us tonight, and it's truly special to have him here. Next, we have a dear friend of mine, Michelle Bender, on the end there, who at the age of 26, some 5 years ago, began pioneering this field of ocean rights. Michelle Bender is the founder and creator of the Ocean Rights Framework, spearheading an innovative and paradigm-shifting solution to our ocean management challenges. Her Ocean Rights ebook is available on Amazon for free, so everybody should be checking that out later. In 2018, she was named one of 15 youth ocean leaders taking on the world internationally by the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. She is an environmental law and policy specialist on a mission. And last but definitely not least, we have Constanza Prieto Fijlis, who is an environmental lawyer with the United Nations Harmony with Nature program, and the legal director of the Latin American program at the Earth Law Center. Constanza is a leading expert on the rights of nature in Latin America with a specialty in the protection of rivers and marine ecosystems. Her work to fight for the rights of ecosystems in the courts now extends to over 5 countries in Latin America. She's one of my superheroes. She's also an expert lawyer of ecocentric laws in general, and was the mastermind behind the second revision of the Panamanian Rights of Nature law that was eventually passed. So many of the people here in the audience tonight, lost the paper, are viewing online. Thank you so much. Are protectors of the ocean in their own rights, right? All of us here are here because we love the ocean and we want to do something to protect it. And we do this through diving, storytelling, science, art, advocacy, philanthropy, etc. And I just want everyone here tonight to know that we can all use our talents, strengths, and our goals in life to have a vital role in conserving the oceans through recognizing ocean rights. So everyone here can pick up the torch after learning about ocean rights tonight. And I know this concept may be obvious for some and very radical for others. And so at the end of the panel, we're hoping to have a constructive discussion and Q&A session. So please be thinking of your questions. So before we begin with the panel, I would like to turn things over to Dewey, who has prepared some videos for us to show us a bit about his community, the Gunayala community in Panama, which we will play, and then he's going to share something very special with us.
Well, the videos that you are going to see are from an island called Playón Chico. That's where I come from, and they were shot by Cristina Mittermeier and Paul Nicklin during an expedition of the Sea Legacy last year in October. I am very lucky to be the first tide turner by only one and the Sea Legacy team, and together we are helping this community to have a better waste management system, and we are working with women so they are keeping their traditions but understanding how to manage better plastic or other materials that didn't exist before. So you will see a little bit more of my story in the videos.
Since I was a little boy, I was taught that the ocean is one of the most important parts of planet Earth. We are a culture that has been always connected to the ocean, and that connection is what has allowed us to survive as a nation. When fishermen come back to the communities, they divide everything they fish that day, so the ocean actually gives food for everyone. For us, the ocean is our life. But nowadays, because of climate change, it's more difficult to get food. Fishermen have to go away for hours in order to fish the same amount that they used to.
You can play this one as well.
The ancestral wisdom of indigenous cultures and how we interact with nature, those are important points in order to find solutions to the climate crisis. I remember clearly a conversation with my great-grandmother when she was telling me that they used to cut pieces of branches of mangroves to put them near the island, and then fish would start living there, and it was easier for them to fish. All the knowledge is passed from one generation to another. We talk about places that protect the ocean from the bad interactions that humans have with it. I hope for the future that our culture keeps alive, so all this knowledge that was passed down from generations to generations can be useful to solve the climate crisis.
And there is one more. I think the audio is late.
The Kuna people are one of the first documented cases of climate change refugees in the Caribbean. The rising tides have destroyed so many communities and have taken even lives.
That used to be an island, by the way.
And now we have to move. Us that have protected nature for millennia are the most affected. Even though the Kuna people are not producing CO2, our islands are getting smaller every year. What we have to do now is to find a way to have a well-planned relocation of more than 35,000 people.
So I guess many people think climate change is not real, but we all know that most scientists agree that it is real, it's bad, it's us, but there is still hope. And that's what I have been trying to work with, the hope that it's still there. Because even though my community doesn't use fossil fuels, you saw we have these little canoes and we move with the wind or our own power. Even though we have solar panels, even though we produce locally and we consume everything that is within our reach, we are the first documented case of an indigenous group that is forced to move because of climate change in Latin America. And I want to share a song with you, a song that my nieces sing all the time in our language. It goes something like this. Uwa bipinosa, Japan sedage, ambo dodo mala, uku birgine. It means something like, out of the sand, there is a little fish that doesn't want to come play with me, that doesn't want to go out in the water to swim free. And this song is very special for me because the moment I realized that we were the first documented case of an indigenous community that is forced to move, I also realized that probably my grandsons or my great-grandsons won't be able to look at nature and at our islands the same way my nieces are able right now. So probably in the future they won't sing this song anymore because they won't be living around the ocean anymore. And even though it's something difficult to accept, I have come to the conclusion that what we have to do now is to try to keep our culture alive, because even though we move and go to another area or region, if we keep our culture alive, we can keep all this ancestral knowledge that is very valuable in order to not only find solutions to climate change or the biodiversity crisis, but also to be better as a civilization. And I think that when we look at indigenous people, we often think that they are primitive or that they do not have technology or knowledge, but in reality, all these terms about sustainability and circular economy is exactly the same way my grandmother used to live. So I think we should get back to that and start learning from our elders before they leave.
Thank you so much, Dewey, not only for being here, but for sharing. I got emotional listening to you, and I think we're all just really fortunate to have the opportunity to hear your story. And getting into what we believe is one of the best solutions to combat many of the threats facing our planet today. I want to start with a very basic question for Constanza. What are the rights of nature?
Thank you, Kali, for the invitation. It's very hard to talk right now after what Dewey said and her testimony. But yeah, I have a mission, and I try to introduce you about right of nature and what mean and what want to change and what dream to convert our earth in a better place. It's not a complete dream. We are working and creating this reality, in fact. Maybe I want to start sharing and talking about what is the current legal and economic system. What happened now is that the Western legal framework and the economic system we have right now is based in an anthropocentric approach. That means it's a traditional center in the human needs, providing little or nothing, no protection for no human species or natural entities. That means nature, ecosystem, or natural entities are basically goods, object of appropriation or exploitation. Conservation, yes, exists under this paradigm, but is also limited and instrumental. A typical example of this type of regulation of conservation under this paradigm is, for example, the International Convention of the Regulation of Whaling. In this preamble, this convention established, for example, this convention contemplates a suitable conservation of a stock of whales that made possible and orderly development of the whaling industry. That means they want conserve whaling to order the whaling industry, not to conserve really the whales, or because whales have a value itself. Also state, in the interest of the nation, of the world, in safeguarding for future generations the great natural resources that whale stock represents. Under this model, nature does not have an intrinsic value, nor is a holder of rights. Conservation has the value to provide resources to be exploited for the future generation. In contrast, Air Law proposed a new paradigm, embracing a holistic worldview in which human beings and natural entities are interdependent, and connected beings, recognizing explicitly that nature has value as itself. That means Air Law accepts that the air has natural limits that we must respect in order to live in harmony. And it is necessary to balance the needs of human beings with the needs of our planet. The Air Law framework permits a change of vocabulary, values, law, policy, and governance. One clear example of Air Law-based normative is one great advisory decision of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which states very clear, this court considers the right to a healthy environment as an autonomous right, seeking to protect the components of the environment, such forest, river, sea, and other, as a legal interest in themselves, for the importance of the other living organisms with whom the planet is shared, also deserving of protection themselves. In Air Law paradigm, nature is considered a legal entity, subject of rights, with the capacity to exercise its rights in the court, appear before court, acting through representatives or guardians. Air Law, through the recognition of the right of nature, seeks to obtain greater level of protection of nature, with higher standard and clear decision-making criteria, to guide governments and limit and manage human activities, creating human-kind relationship and overall responsibilities to the entire community. I want to share briefly a little bit the history of right of nature. The right of nature have evolved from being just a philosophy or a movement to be a legal discipline with an international position. In 2008, Ecuador was the first country to recognize right of nature. And now, 14 years after, more than 35 countries in the world recognize right of nature. In some way, in their constitution, law, regulation, or in their jurisprudence. Also, after 14 years of normative or jurisprudential development, it is possible to observe an interesting advance in implementation of right of nature, and also a specialization of the right of river, forest, mangrove, etc. And also we can see not only in countries but also in international organisms. Like in the United Nations, we can see programs like Harmony with Nature or the Union for Conservation Nature are start talking about introduce this language in their bodies or in their instruments. So it's a reality. We want to change the framework of the whole world. Is starting. We have work to do, but it's a reality. It's happening.
Thank you, Constanza, for that comprehensive overview. So now that we have a general understanding of what the rights of nature are, I'm wondering, Michelle, if you can share with us a little bit more about how the rights of nature can be taken and applied to conserve the ocean.
I'll try to be brief. There's a lot you could say. And I just want to add on a little bit to what Constanza said to start, is that with rights come responsibilities. You cannot separate the two. Just like you cannot separate us from nature, humankind from nature, human rights, human well-being from a healthy environment. It's not either or. And so even when we're talking about rights of nature, rights for the ocean, I want us all to keep that in mind. It's not, a sacrifice for us. It's interconnected. We're interdependent and connected with the ocean. And so really rights are a universal form and a way to make a new code of conduct for all of us to live within the Earth's capacity to sustain human activity. And I'll start by just expanding a little bit more about rights, because that's always the first question, and what recognizing rights for the ocean actually does. And simply put, when we think about rights, they're a statement of societal values, what we value, right? When we think about human rights, corporate rights, ships have rights. I don't know if you knew that. So we're thinking about, okay, what do we value? And with a rights holder, you are afforded more legal protection. And you also are allowed, if you are disabled, a child, for example, to be represented, to have a voice, even if you cannot speak for yourself. So this is what we're trying to do for the ocean. We're trying to elevate the voice of the ocean in decision-making and disputes, and now ask ourselves, instead of how much fish do we want to take out of the ocean, how are we going to solve climate change, or what can the ocean do to help us solve climate change? What does the ocean need to be healthy and thriving outside human benefit and utility? And one change in this concept with rights is also standing. So we have, in many examples, we're giving communities the right as a whole to hold government and industry accountable when there is harm done. And this can be proactively, so when permits are given for offshore drilling, deep sea mining, this can be how we can hold government accountable. It can also be reactively, like Constanza mentioned. We're taking government industry to court with rights of nature. So when there's damage done, we can say this violates the rights of nature. So both sides of the coin with this. Another change that we're seeing is really that holistic paradigm shift that Constanza introduced. And it's starting to think about what level of human activity is permissible in the context of the entire Earth system, and trying to really grasp this interconnectedness, which isn't easy, we know that, but trying to place ourselves as predators within the system rather than having dominion over it. And this causes us to shift, how we make decisions, what alternatives we're going to consider. Dewey mentioned circular economy. This has to be in mind now when we're thinking about this paradigm shift. One example I can just bring up, that's sort of a tangible example, is we have a campaign in Washington for the southern resident orcas. They have been endangered. They've been listed as federally endangered since 2005. They haven't recovered. They've actually basically done worse, now are kind of stable. But we're seeing, even with an endangered status, we're allowing decisions to go through, such as permitting the Navy to possibly, quote-unquote, take, which is harm or kill the orcas, potentially over 50 of them through activity, even though they're endangered. So let's say we give rights to the southern resident orcas. We have to shift our decision-making to now say, well, if this activity is going to violate their rights, even if it might not be in the short term or economically viable in our current cost-benefit analysis, we have to shift how we think about that. Another example is fishery allocation meetings. Right now, the southern resident orcas aren't at the table. They're not a stakeholder in those decisions, even though they need about 920-pound Chinook salmon a day. They're starving. They don't have enough salmon. So let's say they have rights. Now we have to include them with tribal interests, with commercial interests, all these other interests around the table where we're saying, here's your quota, here's your quota. Now the southern resident orcas have a quota. Another approach that, was that you? Sorry. Another approach we're seeing that offers promise for ocean governance is designating an entire ecosystem as a legal entity. So with this approach, we're taking the ocean out of the realm of property and our property rights system. Right now we have this idea of common heritage or owned by all. But now the ocean owns herself. Nobody owns the ocean. Think about that in the context of the high seas. What could be the possibilities we might be able to offer with international ocean governance if the high seas was recognized as a legal entity? How would that shift our current destruction of that ecosystem? And I'll just mention one final example about how this could look in practice. We're seeing co-management structures go along with a lot of these ecosystem designations. And in a lot of cases, that comes with both the government and local communities or indigenous peoples or a combination of all of them being legally designated as guardians to represent the ecosystem's interests and intrinsic values in decisions and disputes. And this is an approach that is largely rooted in indigenous culture, the idea of stewardship for future generations. And there's already the beginnings of this, even if it's not rights in nature, around the world and really in the Pacific. I just came back from French Polynesia, and they have a concept called rehui, where the local community actually decides where to have bans, when to have bans, to what extent on certain types of fish, certain areas, and it's up to them to do that because they're the ones that know the seasons, the breeding seasons, where the species go, when they're not doing so well. And so that's sort of an approach we can begin to think about when we're thinking about rights of nature and ocean rights. And I'll just end by saying that we are in the beginnings of seeing the opportunities and the possibilities, just like with human rights. You know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was not invented yesterday, and we're still having problems implementing it in some countries, right? So we have to think about, well, what standards and principles, both in decision-making and otherwise, can really hold us accountable. And so that's where we're in the stage right now, is we're figuring these sort of approaches out. So once we do recognize rights, how do we hold everyone accountable for it?
Thank you so much, Michelle. So how are we all doing? Do we have you with us still? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I hope so far a few of you may have had the light bulb moment that I had back in 2019 to realize how revolutionary this concept is. And I think it's important to note, however, that the rights of nature have been around for centuries. And as Constanza and Michelle have mentioned, have roots in indigenous cultures around the world. So Dewey, I was wondering how, in your opinion, are the rights of nature intertwined with indigenous culture and specifically in your community in the Guna Yala?
Well, I think I didn't say it, but my name is Diwigdi. It means the spirit who guides dead people. And since I'm a kid, I've been kind of prepared to somehow do something great for my community. And my great-great-grandfather was also called like me. He was a medicine man. He had a lot of plants, and he talked to the plants. He asked for permission when he was going to cut a leaf or a piece of bark or flowers in order to make medicine. And when I was a kid, my grandmothers always bathed me with herbs and different flowers and barks to make myself and my spirit strong. And I think that made the whole difference, because since I'm a baby, I have been part of nature, and all these songs that are sung to us when we are kids talk about how we have a relationship with nature and how we have to protect it. Even in our language, we have a language that doesn't have anything related to Spanish. It's a language that actually comes from South America. The Kuna people right now live in Colombia and Panama. And in our language, ocean or the sea, it's Mubili, which means the grandmother ocean. And guess how do you call the sun, for example? Someone can guess? The sun? If the ocean is the grandmother ocean, what do you? Grandfather, Dada. So the sun for us is our grandfather, and the mountains and nature is our mother. So from these words that we learn when we are kids, we are already understanding how close and related we are with nature. And there are scientists already that explain that this lack of connection is what's causing the problems that we have right now. If we would be able to see how connected and how dependable we are from nature, I'm pretty sure we will be defending it much more than what we are doing now.
Thank you so much, Dewey, and I hope at some point we have the opportunity to learn more of those words. I think if we could introduce these words into English language, maybe we could foster more of a connection to nature as well. So having well-known ocean warriors like you supporting and amplifying this movement will be vital in generating the changes that we need to see all around the world. And I hope after tonight, even more of you will join the cause. So now back to you, Constanza. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about how recognizing the rights of nature is an overarching solution to the many problems that the planet is facing today, like biodiversity loss, overfishing, ocean acidification, climate change, etc. And then in general, how does recognizing the rights of nature benefit all of us?
Thank you, Kylie, for the question. In fact, I am a lawyer, so my answer is from a legal perspective, and I can see right of nature like a transformative legal tool for lawyers and also for society. What I see, in fact, is, well, like a society, we start from, or we are right now in a wrong paradigm. We think we are transgressing the boundaries of the earth. So we are basically thinking the nature is limitless. We think we can grow economically, and our well-being like human can be without any limits, but it's not true. What this air perspective invite to us, like our legal system, is invite us to first. The first thing is say nature has also have rights. Second, reorient our. It's like a first step for me. It's a first step to achieve a solution. Reorient our Western law around principles of relationship, interconnection, reciprocity, and responsibility, as Michelle said, and the recognition that the all Earth, being ecosystem, communities, and components have fundamental right to exist, thrive, and evolve. How I see work in practice in the legal side, I would say, is like that, especially when, for example, countries like Ecuador recognize the right of nature in their constitution. They invite their countries, or they mandate the authorities to prioritize nature. They say, okay, if nature has right in their constitution, nature has the right of nature has the same hierarchy than human rights. Human rights and natural rights have the same hierarchy, and authorities are forced to harmonize both needs. nature needs and the human needs. And of course, it's hard. Of course, it's very challenging for the authorities, but they have to do it. And for example, Ecuador showing they are doing this kind of harmonizing laws, harmonizing jurisprudence, and what we see, for example, in the legal side, they are building new laws. The constitutional mandates are very general. In general, say the nature has right to exist, evolve, and thrive, and then they create laws concretizing this right, for example, for rivers, and or for example, in the case, for example, of Galapagos, they create a marine protected area, and they not only create a law, but also a regulation, and then also create a management plan, and they create a decision-making based solution for the authorities. So it's not just a mandate in the Constitution. It needs a lot of work to concretize these general principles who are at the beginning in a Constitution to make this right happen. But are happening in countries like Ecuador, and are showing us is a possibility. And also, right of nature is not only legal development, as also, for example, through legal action, is a mechanism for defending the interests of nature in court when human activities treat or violate them. For example, recently there is a case in Ecuador, the case of Los Cedros, where there is a forest, a mega diverse forest, where there is an enormous quantity of activities, and the Constitutional Court of Ecuador said no more extractive activities now and in the future. And even though the law accepts the possibility or realize these activities, the court say right of nature are in the Constitution, is need to reestablish the balance. Right of nature are more important, so right of nature have to have prior hierarchy. So it's the way how it's working right of nature. So in one side, allow a better legislation, but in other side allow a protection in the through the court, and also allow reinterpretation of a lot of legal principles, like the in dubio pro natura, or also the principle of the precautionary principle, that provide a new standard for the authorities to guide the systematic application for right of nature and develop a new adaptive normative to fill gaps and harmonize and systematize the existing legal framework. I want to say also the participation of the civil society, is very important, because civil society represent nature. For example, in countries like Ecuador, everyone can really represent nature, and they are the representatives of nature. They protect their nature, and also that is our call today. Everyone is our mission, represent nature. And my last word is maybe say, right of nature is the first step, but it's not the only thing we need to change the paradigm. We need also the political will and to change the paradigm. We need science, like Cali, scientific bodies to catalyze the action. We need the green technology to facilitate the orientation of governmental decision, And also, we need the international law and international multilateralism to base ecocentric decisions on solutions.
Thank you so much, Constanza. It's so fun to be with these guys up here because we've known each other and been working together for years, but we just met in person tonight. And I love hearing the passion with which they speak. So thank you, Constanza. And now, Michelle, I'm wondering if you can share with us what your goals are for the future application of the rights of nature in ocean conservation, and how can we actually implement the rights of nature in society to protect the oceans going forward?
Thank you, Callie. That's a good question. In general, I'll just speak broadly and say that my ultimate goal is to transform our relationship with the ocean, to change how we value, treat, and relate to the ocean. A lot of times when I start talking about this work, it's not even about rights. It's starting with we all have something in common. We are all breathing. And the reason why we can do that is because of the ocean provides half the oxygen we breathe. So just as you were saying, how can we reestablish that connection with the ocean and show its importance so that everyone feels empowered to want to protect and defend and restore ocean health? On a more practical level, with the program I started in 2017, I've been really looking at the gaps to fill in the rights of nature movement. No one was really talking about the ocean at the time, and looking for what insertion points, what leverage points we have. And this is really just the broad sweep, looking at the species level, the regional marine protected area level, issue-specific plastic pollution, for example, and also, ultimately, international ocean governance, because we have one ocean system. Starting at the species level, we're already seeing recognition of species in various forms internationally, and not just animals, plants as well. So New Zealand's government legally recognizes animals as sentient beings. The Uttarakhand High Court of India ruled the entire animal kingdom are legal entities with rights. The UK recently recognized lobsters, crabs, and octopi as sentient beings. And with plants, here in the United States, the White Earth Band of Ojibwe recognized the rights of the Monument, the wild rice plant. So already we have great momentum to build off of, and we're building campaigns with other species that Callie will speak to a little bit more. With marine protected areas, we have yet to see them gain the recognition of legal entity or legal personhood, as we have seen with land-based ecosystems, rivers, forests, national parks internationally, but the momentum is heading in that direction. The Galapagos Marine Reserve in Ecuador, for example, incorporates the rights of nature as a guiding principle for governance. And in Ecuador, there's this understanding that, well, we don't really need to designate, or talk about specific ecosystems because nature as a whole has rights. Pachamama has rights in our Constitution. But they're still ensuring the consistency of the constitutional amendment in supplementary laws, such as the special law for the Galapagos. And as a result, standards to ensure humans have minimal impact on the marine environment are in place, including bans on industrial fishing. Harming all species of shark within the reserve is a criminal offense. And this has led to multiple Chinese fishing vessels being found with illegal shark fins, even outside the marine reserve, being held accountable for damage done. And, for example, one vessel was found with about 6,000 sharks, and the court ruled that this was not only a crime against nature, but a crime against the rights of nature. It was a violation of the rights of the sharks. And this also came with putting the crew in prison and the captain, as well as fining them $5.9 million in damages. And if you think about that, with how much a shark fin or shark meat gets, it's about $150 per shark. So this clearly shows that they're thinking about the intrinsic value and the entire ecosystem benefits of a live, healthy, reproductive shark rather than just its short-term monetary benefits. And so this is a gap that I think Rights in Nature will continue to fill, but it also really demonstrates that need for regional cooperation and international governance, because fishing fleets are coming from the high seas, from other countries, and still violating the rights in nature within countries that recognize this right. Ultimately, the ideal dream then would be recognizing the ocean as a legal entity, a living being with inherent rights. And I do think that there's an insertion point already happening with regards to the new discussions to create a new treaty to protect biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, because there's already that discussion about the precautionary principle and having to have a holistic ecosystem-based approach, even though they're not necessarily talking about rights of nature. And throughout time, with the discussion with UNCLOS and the BBNJ, there have been discussions about what does it mean to be the common heritage of all mankind. And when this concept was first introduced, it came from a place of heritage as responsibility rather than a right to exploit. And so when I started thinking about how this could look like in practice, I asked myself, what if we had a special rapporteur for human rights in the ocean, just like we do for human rights in a healthy environment or other avenues? What would it look like in the UN General Assembly to have a seat for nature or to have a seat for the ocean and have that guardianship representative? Most likely wouldn't be one person, but to start imagining what could a stewardship structure look like in the context of the international ocean. And we're also asking ourselves what are other pathways we can look at transforming our relationship with the ocean other than rights. When we talk about Earth law or other ecocentric legal mechanisms, we can also think about ecocide, animal rights, indigenous rights, customary practices, that don't necessarily touch upon rights, but they all share this common goal of trying to transform our system. And I'll just take one example because I think it offers actually a lot of promise for some of the issues we're facing right now, is in Peru, they passed a national law that prohibits any development that can affect the integrity of the Chicama wave. So if you think about that, it's not necessarily saying that wave has rights or nature has rights, but it's saying that any development or any activity that could potentially affect this wave is prohibited. And so we can think about development on land, but also what about deep sea mining? What about climate change? What are the implications if other countries around the world start to do this? And I touched upon a few of these insertion points, and marine protected areas, species levels, and we are working to implement some of this in Panama with Callie and others. So I will turn it over to her to continue.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been an absolute honor to work with these folks, and also someone else who's in the audience with us tonight, Rachel Bustamante, has been a very important part of our team over the past couple of years. And this next... this next segment is supposed to be a little bit of a case study. So what have we been doing over the past couple of years to get here to have a passed rights of nature law in Panama, and what are we trying to do in the next couple of years to implement that law? So I'm just going to go through a little bit of the work on the ground. Like I said, I've been working in Panama, and these have been my legal advisors, basically, and we've just met today. So back in 2019, I received a National Geographic Early Career Grant to head to the Pearl Islands archipelago in Panama. And it was basically just to see what species of sea turtles are here and in what quantities, what are the threats facing their survival, and what can we do about it. And I found at least 15 different sea turtle nesting beaches that are new to science for the olive ridley sea turtle and the green sea turtle. This is an olive ridley sea turtle nesting track. This is a little hatchling olive ridley sea turtle. And also the endangered green sea turtle is also nesting in the Pearl Islands archipelago. And this is a new foraging habitat that we found in one of the islands just this past October. We were actually on the Sea Legacy 1 with Christina Mittermeier and Paul Nicklin. They left the Caribbean with Dewey, went through the canal, and met up with me in the Pearl Islands in the Pacific. And on our first dive on this reef here, we saw 12 turtles. And this is a place where it's, you know, science, I mean, local community members obviously knew that they had seen turtles out on the reef before, but it's a new foraging ground for hawksbill sea turtles, which I'm sure many of you know, but they're critically endangered worldwide. And in just 10 nights of sampling, we've already tagged around 26 turtles, both juvenile and adult hawksbills. So this was a really exciting finding, something that we did together with the local community. And, for example, this is our research team. We have local community members that are our guides and boat drivers. And then this is the director of the Department of Ocean and Coast of the Ministry of the Environment, a Navy captain, and a videographer from the U.S. And I have a quick video that I would like to show just to show a little bit about what this process of studying sea turtles in Panama has been like.
¿Qué número lees tú ahí?
23.
¡Libre!
In every part of this data collection process, we're involving the local community. So after we catch the turtles, we bring them down to the beach in front of the local community members' houses, and the kids and their parents come down and participate in every part of the data collection process, from measuring to cleaning the turtle before we're about to apply the tag. And it's been really exciting just to see the interest in these young kids about becoming marine biologists, or, you know, a lot of them hadn't even heard of the career biology before. So it's been quite an exciting experience. And this is a friend of mine, 11-year-old EDL, and I'm teaching him how to hold a hawksbill sea turtle and release the turtle back into the wild after we collected all of the necessary data. It's also cool because before we got to this community, a lot of the kids had never even put on a glove before. So we're like showing the kids how to put on the gloves to be able to interact with the turtles. And it gives me a future for, or hope for the future of the stewardship of this reef ecosystem and its inhabitants. So we do a lot of environmental education with the kids as well, just helping to instill that love for the environment and help connect the kids back to the environment in places where maybe there isn't the same type of connection that Dewey described from a young age. And in addition to studying the sea turtles, I also spend a lot of time documenting the threats facing their survival in the Pearl Islands. So here we just have an example of an illegally harvested olive ridley sea turtle. And I'm also working with fishermen to document threats like fisheries bycatch or accidental catch in fishing gear of sea turtles. So you can see here, this is an artisanal gill net with a critically endangered leatherback sea turtle. I don't know how many of you know about the leatherback sea turtle situation in the East Pacific, but they've declined more than 99% in since the 1980s. So the presence of this critically endangered species in the Pearl Islands is really exciting, and this collaboration with the fishermen and learning more about their interaction with the fisheries and ways that we can maybe decrease this interaction is even more exciting. And here we just have more examples of the threats that are facing the survival of sea turtles in Panama. So this is crude hawksbill sea turtle meat and cooked green sea turtle meat. This is a medicinal remedy made from the oil of cooked sea turtle meat combined with coconut oil. And this is the shell of the hawksbill sea turtle. You can see it's beautiful, and that's unfortunately the downfall of the sea turtle species, is it's just too beautiful. And people use the shell of the turtle mostly to, in Panama at any rate, make spurs for cockfighting. The shell is also used in jewelry and combs and things, but these spurs are the major use of hawksbill sea turtle parts in Panama. This photo is from Panama City, so the vendor wasn't openly selling the spurs, but as soon as we just asked if he had them, he brought them out. So they know that it's illegal, it's just something that's still done. And this photo is from La Esmeralda, one of the local communities in the Pearl Islands that I worked in. And, you know, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I think this picture is really important because, you know, here we show, here we show a, you know, deceased rooster and its owner removing the hawksbill shell spur from its foot, and then we have the law enforcement officer with his back turned. And this is something that I saw a lot in the field, was just the lack of implementation and enforcement of existing environmental protection laws. And it really struck me. You know, when you're in the field, I'm sure a lot of you know, you don't have internet access a lot of the time. You're just alone with your thoughts and nature and the threats that you may be seeing. And I felt really empowered and determined to just try and do something about it. I wasn't really sure what that was going to be. And I had a meeting with the director of the Army Navy in Panama, Servicio Nacional Aeronaval, just to discuss what I saw basically and ask if there were any opportunities for collaboration. And it turns out that there are. And since we've been having these discussions, the director has invited us to give workshops to the Army Navy about the enforcement of existing laws and the recognition of endangered hawksbill sea turtle parts. Just in April, we trained 2,500 soldiers in the recognition of thank you. In the recognition of illegal product. There's a new artificial intelligence app that lets you take a picture of a piece of jewelry, and it'll tell you with X percentage of certainty whether or not that is made from a hawksbill turtle or plastic, for example. And, of course, the reason why we're all here, another thing that I decided I wanted to try to do was present a new law proposal to recognize the rights of nature in Panama. So like I mentioned, I didn't have internet, and the book that I brought with me was called The Rights of Nature, A Legal Revolution That Could Change the World. So here I am, like, seeing all of these threats and reading this book, and I was like, hey, how hard can it be? All I have to do is just propose the concept, and the worst that can happen is they say no. And I'm no environmental lawyer, like I mentioned before. I'm a marine biologist, so I used facts. I used data from the field and the photos of what I was witnessing, and met with the First Lady of Panama, and I went with an indigenous marine biologist from the Caribbean coast of Panama, Felipe Baker, and we discussed what we had seen, and she was really excited about the concept of the rights of nature, and she supported us when we went to speak with Panamanian Parliament member Juan Diego Vasquez about the concept, and he was also really excited. So we started drafting the proposal, and that's when I got the Earth Law Center involved, so I knew that I wasn't an expert in this concept, and I knew that there were experts out there, so I got in touch with Constanza, Michelle, and Rachel, and that's when we started working on this new revised version of the law that was eventually passed 3 months ago. And here are just some photos from these are just some photos from the different legal debates that we went to. That's, like I said before, that's where I met Dewey in the first place. And then on Earth Day, just last month, or 2 months ago now, the Panamanian Parliament member Juan Diego Vasquez and I were invited to discuss this new approach that we took to protecting nature in Panama at the UN, which is really exciting. And something else which gets into the implementation aspect of our work in Panama is now we have the General Rights of Nature law, but what's next? So what we worked on after this general law was a new proposal to include the rights of sea turtles in a new sea turtle conservation law that was already underway. And what we did was we worked together to create a new article that recognizes the rights of sea turtles. So some of the rights that were passed, at least in the public debate that we had. So Panamanian laws go through 3 debate phases before the law draft ends up on the president's desk. And so right now this law has passed 2 of the 3 debate phases, and the verbiage that's in the law right now is that the state will guarantee that natural and legal persons protect the rights of sea turtles and their habitats, such as living and having free passage in a healthy environment, free from pollution and other anthropocentric impacts that cause damage, such as climate change, pollution, bycatch, coastal development, unregulated tourism, among others. So if this passes, this will be the first time in the world that the specific rights of a species group have been identified in a law. So. And lastly, our second initiative that we're working on right now to bring this rights of nature concept into the implementation phase within other subsequent laws in Panama is we're deploying satellite tags on sea turtles to better understand their movements throughout the Pearl Islands. So for those of you that don't know, satellite tags are basically like a GPS that you can put on an endangered species. And every time a sea turtle, for example, takes a breath, rises to the surface of the ocean, the antenna leaves the water and sends the turtle's position to the satellites. And then we get pings on our computers saying, hey, turtle number 123 is in X location. And some of the preliminary data that we have so far have showed some specific concentration and foraging habitat of hawksbill sea turtles in the northern part of the Pearl Islands archipelago near an island called Isla Saboga, which is that reef that I showed you earlier. And this is really exciting because of this concentrated activity. We have an opportunity to propose a new marine reserve that may just encompass that small reef. So because the Pearl Islands is a very large area, and it's largely privately owned, it's a red zone for drug trafficking, etc. I've been told by the Ministry of the Environment that it is an area that can't be created as a marine reserve or marine protected area as a whole, but we can carve out small, important portions of the archipelago like that reef and create maybe 5 small marine reserves within the 200-island archipelago. So this is something that we're working on now, not just creating the marine reserve, but including the rights of nature and the rights of the coral reef and its inhabitants within the proposal, within the official decree. And I just wanted to throw up some of the donors that have made this work possible. Okay, so that's just a wrap-up of a case study, basically, just to help us have an example of how just an everyday person, like I'm just someone that studies sea turtles, but I was able to use that data set that I had for this particular purpose. And I know there are many people in this room and around the world that have such data sets that maybe could have this type of implication within the government of the relative country. So, Dewey, in this process of advancing the rights of nature and ocean conservation, we can all learn from each other, especially the traditional and indigenous knowledge of ocean and nature relationships since time immemorial. But it's important not to appropriate that cultural knowledge, right? So can you express how indigenous beliefs, cultures, and voices can be more amplified in ocean and marine wildlife conservation to redress historical inequalities and dispossession from nature?
Sure. First of all, I want to ask you, how old are you again?
I just turned 30.
30. I mean, I'm super impressed because I think this is the second time we see each other. And the fact that Cali was able to pass a law in my country, it's remarkable. That member of the parliament that you saw, it's also one of the youngest members of parliament. He's great. He's independent. He's fighting against corruption. And I think that's the reason why also this was able to pass, because I've been involved in different laws to ban plastic or single-use plastic, and it was such a tedious process, and I'm super impressed that you did this almost by yourself. Of course, but you were there by yourself. Like, you were not from Panama, and you were sitting there, presenting this. It's really remarkable, and I want to thank you for everything you've done to my country. And then going back to your question, I think that it's super important to recognize that indigenous people are not should not be seen as less capable of. I think we just have to be given the right tools. And for example, I would not be able to be seated here if I wouldn't have studied in Switzerland. So my government paid $150,000, so I could go to study in Switzerland, learn English, and understand how tourism worked, so we could apply the same standards of the highest level hotels in Dubai, for example, to community-led tourism and indigenous tourism in Panama. So I was trained there, came back to Panama, and I have been working in the government for over 10 years already. We are developing a new model, a new tourism model that's called Tourism Conservation and Research. And what we are doing is working with local communities, working with indigenous peoples, with Afro diaspora. We have in Panama African Americans that came from the slaves times in Africa, but also a group of African Americans that came from the Antilles, and they have a lot of knowledge about nature, and they have a very strong relationship with indigenous people, because when they escaped from slavery, they would go to the forest and they would make alliances with indigenous people. So we're focusing on trying to understand that knowledge that has survived for millennia to actually create products or experiences that could bring economic benefit to the communities. And this is very important because you cannot ask a community not to cut a tree that they will need in order to make fire, and why should they stop their development process because the rest of the world have already finished their resources. So what we are aiming for is make them understand how much value a tree standing is, or a turtle, or a coral reef, for the sake of tourism. And when I talk about tourism, as I said before, in this model, tourism conservation and research, tourism is the first step, so we could have economic benefits for the communities, but also for conservation, because the main resources and the heritage that the indigenous people have might be lost unless we establish a certain value to it. But we cannot protect or we cannot conserve what we don't know. So that's where science and research comes very handy, because even our traditional knowledge is being lost. And if we don't record everything, it's going to be too late in a couple of years. So tourism promotes conservation. For conservation, we need research. But then research also gives us content and information that is very valuable for discerning travelers like you that would want to learn from local communities, learn from nature, understand what's the current situation of the earth, but at the same time help local communities in their development. So based on this strategy, we have communities that are empowered, that are protecting their natural and cultural heritage, but because they see a value on it.
Thank you so much, Dewey. And before we move on, I'm wondering if you can share with everyone what you're wearing and why you chose to wear it.
Yes. Sorry, I forgot. But this, it's called mola, and it's a traditional technique. This is actually made by my grandmother. And the mola designs are actually very old designs that we used to paint in our bodies. But then when Spanish came, they forced us to wear clothes. So what our grandmothers did was to start putting all these designs in different, like with different layers of fabric. And as you can see, they are mostly related to nature, to establish that connection that we have with nature and to make sure that nature is part of us. This is also very traditional, and it represents the connection we have with earth, because gold is taken from the ground, and it's to remember that as well, always.
It's just, I got goosebumps listening to you, and this is such an important part of this conversation, and we're really so fortunate to have you here with us tonight. Constanza, I'm wondering if you can share an example of how advocating for Indigenous rights and Indigenous communities in general have pioneered and affected change in advocating for the rights of nature so far.
Yeah, I would say in Latin America we have plenty of these kind of cases. Even before the explosion of recognition of right of nature, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights already recognized in a very clear way the interconnection of indigenous people rights and the right of a healthy environment. So because the special relationship between the nature and the right of indigenous people. The case, maybe the more famous case I can mention, but there are several more. In fact, in Ecuador we can mention a lot, but maybe an important case is the case of the Constitutional Court of Colombia, which is the Atrato River case. And I will mention this case for two reasons. First, because in this case, the Constitutional Court recognized the right of the Atrato River, but the plaintiff never asked for that. And in Colombia, they didn't have the recognition of right of nature in the Constitution or in the law. It was just they were advocating for the right of the community, the Afro-descendant community and the indigenous people, because the pollution of the river. And the court finally decided for the biocultural right, for the for the exercise of the biocultural right of the communities was important, the recognition of the right of the river. So the court said when finally the indigenous people exercise the right of the biocultural right, they allow nature to exercise their own inherent right. So they do this inherent connection between indigenous people and nature, and so that is amazing because they finally made this interconnection so clear, even though either the plaintiff never asked for that. The court say that work in this way, and if the indigenous people need to exercise their own right, they help nature to exercise the inherent right. So I think that is an amazing way to see the interaction between indigenous people and right of nature, and I think many other cases can be reply in the same way in Latin America. In Ecuador we have, for example, a case for the Cofán community in the same situation, and also for a strategic reason, they also always we advocate indigenous people rights and right of nature together when we can and the circumstances allow it. So yes, are always together and are always we cannot separate those rights in general. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Constanza. So I think it's important to note that every single person can be part of this movement if they desire to be. From science to art to law to storytelling, there is a role that we can all play in advancing ocean rights. Now, we have some very exciting news that we would like to share with you. The following is an initiative that is just getting underway and will officially be launched more publicly in January of 2023, but you are all getting a sneak peek. This initiative is something that Michelle has been leading in collaboration with the Ocean Race, and it's something that we are all a part of developing. Can I get a drum roll, please? We are working on a United Nations Universal Declaration of the Rights of the Oceans. So as Michelle mentioned, we have our Universal Declaration on Human Rights from 1948, which of course we still are working on implementing fully. We have the Universal Declaration on the Rights of the Child, and we're hoping that a Universal Declaration of the Rights of Nature and the Rights of the Oceans is soon to follow. And Michelle, I don't know if you want to share a few more words about this and introduce the video that we'll show.
I'll just add on it a few more sentences. So our goal is to, through this process, create principles towards a Universal Declaration and present that to the United Nations General Assembly next September 2023 in hopes of them taking upon this process to then move towards a Universal Declaration. Our process right now is the Ocean Race already uses conservation summits that they call the Ocean Race Summits to raise awareness of ocean health issues and solutions in the host cities that they will go around. So we're utilizing these summits and then also developing a series of innovation workshops where we're trying to gather key stakeholders, and maybe key isn't the right word, broad stakeholder representation. So not only scientists, NGOs, policymakers, government officials, but industry. We're inviting industry to the table to come to these discussions, to learn and to hear what are your concerns, what would you like to see, what is your relationship with the ocean, so that this can be a shared common vision that everyone wants to be a part of. And ultimately, it becomes something like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where if you're denying it, you're on the wrong side. And it's ultimately, it doesn't make sense to deny it anymore. And so with that, maybe I'll stop there and we can show the video. Oh, and actually, so this was the most recent summit in Seychelles that we somewhat publicly launched the initiative already in March. And so we're starting to have those discussions. So you can see a summary of some of the talks that happened from that summit.
We might need manual playing.
Welcome to the Ocean Race Summit Seychelles. This is the 13th in our series of Ocean Race Summits and our first ever Ocean Race Summit in the Indian Ocean.
The Ocean Race is the world's toughest sailing event, where the elite of the sailing profession battle it out on the most treacherous oceans. It is the toughest test in team sports, and this means pulling together.
Here we are today, joining the Ocean Race in its efforts to achieve more and improve policies to tackle the pressing issues of our time and challenge the future of the beating blue heart of our planet.
Coming from a team sport, I've learned over the years that there is one question that the greatest of team players tend to ask, and that is, What can I do?
We must work hard, just as hard, for our oceans as they work for us.
We are working towards a universal declaration of ocean rights that outlines how we shall engage with the ocean.
Historically, the relationship between states and the international area of the ocean has been more on the right to use and less on the responsibility to conserve.
I do believe that in 2022, this year, we can actually stop the decline in the ocean's health. This year. It's an amazing thought.
Thinking like the custodian of everything you can see to the horizon and beyond makes you think differently.
I think by being here, all of us actually are starting to do things in a different way.
We're having the Ocean Summit. I mean, this is a huge impact.
We, the youth of Seychelles, pledge to be responsible and proactive guardians of our ocean, marine life, and natural environment. Together we promise to be champions for the sea. Thank you.
I would just like to thank all the stakeholders and the people of Seychelles as we take this important step to transition to implementation of this marine spatial plan.
We are definitely doing something great for our nation.
Absolutely, for your nation and for the world.
85% of the world subscribes to a belief system. So where are those heads of those belief systems? Because they can mobilize people in a profound way that can change values and beliefs.
You can try and change someone's mind, but until you change their heart, that's when the movements will happen.
We have so much to learn from each other and so much that we must achieve together.
I do not want to look back in the next 10 years and say, wow, did we have a beautiful earth? We do have something beautiful. We have something irreplaceable. But we're not looking after it like we should.
The survival of this planet depends on each one of us pulling together exactly as the crew in the ocean race do it.
It's our world. It's your turn to do your bit. So don't just talk the talk, walk the walk also.
I commend the Ocean Race for all it does and wish it success in its drive for a universal declaration on ocean rights. I thank you.
So, before we open up the floor to questions, I have one question for the panelists, and that is, how can the everyday citizen get involved in the Rights of Nature movement? What can we do? In just a few words. I know there's a lot of things that we can do, but briefly.
Okay, I'll go. I think that we have to understand where we come from, and I'm pretty sure all of us come from a very sacred place. And of course, you're living in the United States of America, but probably some of your ancestors were from Ireland, for example, or Scotland, and there were in some areas there still are indigenous people. So somehow within us there is this knowledge and this ancestry that we have to remember. And then when we remember and then we get in touch with that, I think we will be strong enough to change the world.
Sure. Maybe I'll do two. I think first and foremost is listen and learn from indigenous, local, coastal communities. They have the knowledge. I can't stress enough how much it's changed my life to just learn from Pacific Island nations and to sit down with people like Nainoa Thompson and just listen and try to think of how can I help. And second, I want to highlight that everyone can be a part of this movement. You don't have to be a lawyer, and Callie is the perfect example of that. So there's no excuse, really, because you can go to your representative. It's here in the U.S. You can do it in other countries as well and say, hey, have you heard about rights in nature? What do you think about doing that here? And the great thing is organizations like Earth Law Center, we have the resources to help you. So if you're not sure how to get started and you want some talking points, you want some information, there are hundreds of organizations actually working on this internationally, and we're all here to help.
Yeah, I think also what we're looking for is basically reset this relationship with nature. We all are part of the problem. We are all part of the solution. Like, it's not necessarily, like Cali is a great example, but maybe not all of us are called to develop laws or present in the parliament, but maybe just be conscious of our, for example, consuming habits, or see, for example, consume information about what is going on, or maybe how many of us know about, for example, what is going on in the Pacific Islands with the people have to emigrate from their own lands to other places because the environmental crisis. You have the bigger power, the vote, and you can exert almost every 4 years, and that is powerful, and you can exert that right, and it's free. You can do it.
So I actually have just one more thing before I open the floor up to questions, and the panelists don't even know about this. So I am just so beyond grateful to all of you, and you as well, Rachel, for all of your work and your leadership in pioneering the pursuit of recognizing the rights of nature around the world. You're leading the way, and you're making this happen at such a young age. And I want to present you with a blown glass wave that represents to me the wave makers and change makers that you are, and the way that because of you, I think we really will have a rights of nature revolution, and I think it's already happening. So thank you. So everyone can see what it looks like. So now, does anyone have any questions for our panelists?
Thank you. This has been really interesting and really great. The big question that's been running through my mind is, why does it seem that it's been so easy for you to do this, to get a country like Panama to just, decide, yeah, we recognize the rights of nature? Where's the opposition? Is there any opposition? And what does the opposition say? Because usually when you have new ideas like this, the opposition comes out of the woodwork and you have to fight against it. I'm just wondering, is there none? And if there is something, then who is it? What is it?
Thank you. You may have comments on this as well, but just to start, I think something Dewey mentioned is really important, that the senator that we were working with in Panama, so the senator that actually took on the idea and sponsored it within the parliament, is very progressively minded. He's really a pioneer. He's 27, I think, the youngest parliament member ever in Panama, and I think it's really thanks to him that this went through in Panama, because if he hadn't taken on the law, he could have laughed in my face and said, forget it, and sent me walking. But he sat there and listened and assigned someone on his team to work with me and then eventually to work with the Earth Law Center. in developing the specific articles of the law. So, he's paying for someone's time to be focused on this issue, and I think it's because he's so progressive and just open-minded and seeing like a better future for everyone and for nature. And I think Panama as well it has the same biodiversity as Costa Rica, for example.
Or more.
Or more. But, Costa Rica has this like overwhelmingly well-known ecotourism industry. And I think this was something that I spoke about with the First Lady back in February of 2020, is that if Panama works on a rights of nature law, it would be world-renowned for its placing this importance on nature conservation, and that would bring more interest from other countries and from tourists to come to Panama and learn more about the biodiversity in Panama. So I think that there was this like room and desire to grow on the country's behalf in general within the Ministry of Tourism and the Environment and the President himself. So I think that was another factor. And then ultimately, even Juan Diego Vasquez, the parliament member, said that he employed a strategy of not talking about what we were doing while we were doing it. So we didn't really invite opportunity for the opposition to come. I mean, they were invited to the table at every step of the process, but we weren't loud. We just kept our heads down. We did the work. We had the conversations necessary and announced it after the president signed it. So.
Strategy. And I would also like to add that Panama is kind of moving forward with a lot of environmental policy. So, for example, we achieved the 30 by 30 last year. We have a new law that protects coral reef and also make sure that a representative from indigenous communities is within a committee that will work on developing economy around the regeneration of coral reef. And there are many other public policy that has been created in the last 2 years and that has changed also the mind of politicians in general.
I'll just add on something too. What we're seeing in the U.S. and other countries a lot is the opposition or corporations and industry. A lot of that in the U.S. has been in response to some of the ways that the laws or the resolutions are being developed because they have specific language that strips corporate rights. So that's personally not our approach, because we try to look at it more inclusive and as an opportunity that this will benefit everyone. So that's one response. And then, for example, in Idaho, it has come down to basically this conversation about, well, what about our rights and our rights of future generations? Because they've picked up on this movement, and the state has actually passed an anti-rights of nature law saying it's illegal. And the messaging they're using is saying that it's inconsistent with our rights of the children, which, if you listen to us up here, it's all the same. So it's really, it's just like with any other movement or campaign you're trying to run, it's getting the messaging right. And if you don't do that from the get-go, like Callie did, you could face opposition right at the start.
Do you have anything to add or no?
Yeah, I think one of the main, probably, I think Latin America is fostering a good environment for this law right now, because we have a supranational core, like also promoting the right of nature in one of their decisions right now. Not only in one of them, they have been consistent with that. So having a supranational core saying we adopt this vision, I think give certitude for the countries to adopt this vision also. So I think also help them when we have to provide arguments, for example, to Juan Diego and the other deputies, like already the Inter-American Core have accepted that vision. They say, oh, okay, so that is serious, it's nothing like crazy we're saying. I think helps. So I am pro and very I defend a lot international law because I think it helps to provide a floor to develop also domestic law and create this environment for regions or for the world to create or foster this kind of new legislation. I think it's important. Yeah.
First of all, congratulations. This is inspiring. A two-parter, if I may. First of all, are there any other countries that you're actively talking to and making any headway with this approach and actually having this type of legislation? And then, back to Panama, you have the law. What are the steps that you see the country taking in actually implementing the law?
I don't know, Michelle or Constanza, if you want to do the first one.
Yeah, I could start. Well, actually, a great resource to see all the laws and policies is the UN Harmony with Nature website. That program catalogs all of them. And you can actually click on all the links if you want to read them, even though they're in different languages. But in the U.S., most of the laws and ordinances, they're at the local level. So Santa Monica passed a sustainability rights ordinance in 2014. Many people don't know about that, and that's a pretty cool coastal town. It's not just a tiny city that nobody knows about. In Latin America, we have state laws in Mexico. We have decisions in Peru, Ecuador, national rights and nature law, Colombia. 20 ecosystems have gained or been recognized as legal entities subject to rights, which a lot of people don't know about, including the Amazon rainforest. And that came as a response to a climate change and youth suing on behalf of their rights as future generations. And we're also seeing court decisions in India. We're seeing the guardianship co-management structure for legal personhood in New Zealand for the Whanganui River and Te Urewera National Park. So it is a global movement. Canada, rivers, I mean, it's everywhere.
And I would like to add that in Panama, for example, there are 7 indigenous communities, and they all kind of bring to the table something very different and special. There is one indigenous community that is the Naso people, and there are only 3,000 of them. So if we are not careful, in a couple of decades, we can lose that language, because already half of them don't speak their traditional language. So keeping languages and cultures alive, it's very important. Protecting them, and as we were saying before, make them aware that they are stewards and that they have the power to protect the nation and the power to make money out of it. It's something very important, because as countries, we don't have enough resources. As Kali saw and as you saw in the pictures, we don't have enough resources, or I will change what I said. We don't allocate the resources correctly so that there is a surveillance and an enforcement of some of the laws that already exist. But what if we make the communities and the boat drivers and the tourist guides and the handcraft makers to be these guardians, because we don't have enough money to pay an army, for example? If they end up being the guardians and developing a management plan together with the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Tourism, I think that those are the next steps that we have to foster, and especially like providing them with the resources, because in Latin America, unfortunately, we have been used to just receive cement or blocks or zinc to build a house when the elections come. And it's a very paternalistic history, what we have had. And what we should promote is to have the communities empowered so they can conserve and they can have an economic benefit out of that conservation.
Additionally, on the implementation side, Juan Diego Vasquez, the senator, is really interested in working with us to develop an implementation plan. And the law was signed on February 24th of this year, and it goes into effect February 24th of next year. So we have a little bit more time to continue working on this plan, and we're working in collaboration with the United Nations Harmony with Nature program to see how other countries have implemented the law and what specifically we can prioritize for starting this implementation process in Panama. But it's very much a work in progress, of course, as it's only been passed for 3 months.
If I can say something about implementation, for this kind of law, I think data and science is key, as you know. So that, and of course, a budget and financing this kind of law is key. So right of nature must be translated in indicators, scientific indicators. So that is part of the job of the governments, and also the scientific bodies have been like it has to be with this kind of law, not only at local level or domestic level, but also at international level. And it's important also in these kind of places like Panama or are real places where the biodiversity of the world is placed. It's not many places like Panama or Brazil, or there are few places like these kind of places. Like multilateralism is very important to allocate resources to collect data and create better places for the world. Finally, I think.
Exactly.
And if I can just add, at a regional level, for example, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Panama are creating a marine protected area between all these countries that is connected, and this allows to actually foster conservation, because if you just protect one side of the ocean, it won't make much sense, because the animals won't stay there. They move between all the borders of these countries. They don't have borders. So we have to collaborate between countries so this could improve.
And this is actually something we didn't have time to talk about, so I'm glad you brought it up. We're also working with the Minister of the Environment of Ecuador to include the rights of nature in CMAR, so the Corridor Marino between Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, and Ecuador. We've already had the main presentation to the Minister of the Environment and 3 subsequent meetings with his legal advisors to work on the verbiage. So we're hoping that this is another win for nature in the next year. We have time for one more question.
Hallie, can I jump in?
Okay.
Yeah. So, I had the pleasure of meeting Michelle at EarthX 6-7 years ago? 5 years ago. That's what it was. So I followed this young lady. I want to challenge the audience tonight. You have heard, perhaps, the greatest way that these are things we can do. We're not going to get the microfiber plastic out of the ocean. But this is something we can do. Everyone, the 100 that's here and the 1,000 that are going to see it on YouTube, if we all make them aware of this, this is the way we can impact policy people. If we all make them, if they get to watch this YouTube thing, how many people will get this message that are influencers, doers, deciders, and decision makers? So as an ocean ambassador, one of the 1,500 ocean ambassadors, one of 7 picks by Sylvia to be there, and that point of view, I'm begging you to use this opportunity in the video that's going to be in the Explorers Club from tonight to inform everyone you know that this is the future. Rights for all nature, every action counts. Together we can. We leave no species behind. That was the first 3 models at the UN. We can do this.
Okay. Constance, can I turn it over to you? Okay, one more question.
Well, I feel kind of, how can I follow up after that beautiful plea for, it was beautiful, thank you. I was just wondering about areas of the ocean that don't have coastal, like the deep ocean, for example, that don't have representatives to speak for them. So like issues like deep sea mining, how do you plan to address that? Oh, no.
That's a great question, and something that just came up in my visit to French Polynesia and the Blue Climate Summit. And for a while, it had been a little difficult to make that line of, thought of how we can use, rights in nature on very specific issues like that. I kind of strayed away from it, to be honest. But after speaking at the summit, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition approached me and said, we need this approach to prevent deep sea mining. And I think we're working towards a strategy now to develop what that can look like. And it could be mobilizing the countries, the states, the local communities that have already passed rights in nature laws, seeing what we can do about it there. It can also be working with new communities to develop new rights in nature laws, but also new ecocentric form legal mechanisms that I mentioned, like protecting wave integrity, or looking at what sort of other solutions we haven't developed to really think about this. And I think indigenous customary practices, traditional knowledge is going to be really important. There is an initiative co-created by the Pacific Network on Globalization to draw the blue line in the Pacific against deep sea mining. And that comes with a declaration that is beautiful. If you haven't seen it, it's online on their website, but it talks about their kinship with the ocean and why they do not want practices like this there. And I'll just end by saying that I do think, and this is conversations that are happening, is we have to present alternatives, because there are countries that do need the economic development. So if we're going to tell them they shouldn't be deep sea mining, what else are we going to offer them? Because we're putting the developed countries have put them in this position where they are now not knowing how to react to climate change and what to do, because they're not the ones largely responsible for the issues like we are. And so I think that's going to be a really critical conversation to happen, and it's going to be a paradigm shift, and it's going to have to be a shift in power.
Thank you.
Well, that was just incredible. Now you know why we're called WOW. Thank you, Callie, and your incredibly talented panel this evening for this thought-provoking conversation. Thank you for bringing us into it, and I know it's just the first of many more. Thank you. So in closing for day 2, I have a few other thanks. If you just will give me a minute or two. I'd like to thank Ben Farmer and the Coral panel for the discussion on the future of corals, and Ellen Pickett and the incredible Penguin panel and ambassadors for today's really inspiring conversation. Along with Ellen and Ben and everyone else who participated today, we really wouldn't be here without the support of our Chief Foundation sponsor, Rolex, and we'd like to thank them, along with Glex and Schmidt Marine, the Phil Stephenson Foundation, Lindblad Expeditions, Fjallraven, and a number of generous individual supporters. This whole week of incredible programming is brought to us by a group of volunteers and our staff here, headed by Ted Janulis and this year's co-chair, Julie Wallace, Alex Wallace, and Callie. So thank you all for that incredible programming. So we hope that you'll join us here again on Thursday and Friday. Tomorrow, of course, is the UN programming, so we hope that you'll all participate in the ways that you find most valuable. On Thursday and Friday, the schedule is online. And let's see, and we also have 2 field trips on Saturday. So one is to Coney Island for a beach sweep, and one is with Ellen to Shinnecock Bay, and that's just a really incredibly unique experience. So I encourage you to look online and see if you can join Ellen for that. We also have our first ever virtual ocean auction. And if you were in the Penguin Palace earlier today, you might have decided it was really time for that Antarctica trip. And thanks to Lynn Blatt, we have an incredible cruise for 2 with a lot of multiple dates. And you can find that on the ocean auction, along with some hikes in the UK and the US. Some very cool dive gear, some incredible experiences with famous firsts, famous scientists, and an incredible encounter with a penguin if you'd like to go to New York Aquarium, just to name a few. So I guess that's it for tonight. Thank you all again for supporting us in World Oceans Week. Good night.